see everybody back tonight. Been a busy day. In the letters that John wrote, Apostle John John, the first letter of John chapter 1 through 5, is primarily addressed to churches. And then in the second letter of John, 2 John, it seems to be probably written to a specific church. And listen as John talks, and he's talking obviously to Christians. And he tells us and gives us some insight there. In the first verse of John 2, it says, "The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not only I, but also who know the truth, because of that truth that abides in us, will be with us forever." So John is saying that he loves the church, and he loves them because of the love that they have. And the reason he loves them, that love is the truth. He loves the truth. And the truth is what Jesus brought when he came. In John 1, great verse, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14, tells us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, is what John says. He says, we beheld his glory, and it was full of grace and truth. So, if we want to know truth, then we need to know Jesus, don't we? Amen. Yeah, we need to know Jesus. And he is truth. He come and brought truth. And it was an interesting story in John chapter 6, the Gospel of John chapter 6. This is where Jesus fed the 5,000. Jesus had great crowds, throngs of people that surrounded him. And not unlike today, I have noticed, as you may have too, when we feed people, people come. If there's food involved, we can usually, that's a great enticement for people. It is for me too. I mean, let's face it. I like to eat. And so Jesus would have he fed the 5,000 men there. We know that there was over 5,000. But he fed them, and then he kind of left them there. And they were wanting to find Jesus in John 6 there. They wanted to find Jesus, and he left and went to another area across the lake there, or he eventually wound up across the lake. And they said, well, how did you get here? Why are you here? All these questions. And Jesus said, you sought me out, not because you really cared and wanted to see the signs and great things that I did and said. You sought me out because you were wanting some more food, basically. You were wanting to eat again. So they wanted to know whether, more or less, in a Texas term, they wanted to know where their meal ticket was, so to speak. And so Jesus gives them a long dissertation there, and he talks about that their forefathers, when God brought Israel up out of the land of Egypt, he brought them out, and remember he fed them manna, and this manna came from heaven, and Jesus used that example and said, you know, you were fed the bread from heaven, and he said, I am the true bread from heaven. You fed on that manna and you died. If you feed on my bread, if you feed on me, you'll never die. And he goes into a long dissertation there about that, and he says, even to the point of saying, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part in me. That was really tough for those folks to grab a hold of. And it's also tough for a lot of his disciples. A lot of them turned away at that point. Said, this is too strong of a saying. And so Jesus, at that point, when they had left him there, and he turns to his disciples, his apostles, and he says, will you leave me too? Are you going to leave too? Is this too tough for you? And Peter says, where would we go? Where would we go? You have the words. We believed you. We've come to know you. You're the Holy One. You're the Holy One of God. So Peter there is saying, it doesn't matter. We believe in you. And Jesus goes on to say, the words that I speak are spiritual words. That unless we feed on that bread from heaven and drink his blood, we have no part in him. We partook of that this morning and also just right now. But the bread that he's talking about is that life, that living life, and that comes from the heading up here of love. It's hard for us as mortals to understand God's love. Because when we think of love, we think of Well, probably several things. We think of maybe our favorite boyfriend or girlfriend or our wife or our husband, and that is a good love. But God's love so much, it supersedes that so great to another realm, to the extent that even when God looked down from heaven and seen mankind and all of the sin, in Romans 3:23, you know what it says? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And even then, when he looked down, he even then loved. That's the love that God had. So much that he sent of his own self, his son, to this earth to die for mankind. Jesus came for everyone. Not everyone accepted Jesus, though. So where would you go? So to the Jews that abided in him in John chapter 8, verse 31, he says, if you abide in me, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. And he carries it on, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, this offended some of those that had believed. It offended some of the people around him. And they said, well, we've never been a slave to anybody. However, they were under Roman bondage at that particular time. But they said, no, we're free. We have Abraham as our father. And yet these are the same people that were chastising him, and shortly thereafter would be even yelling, crucify him. So the truth will set you free. And they said, well, our father is Abraham. And Jesus goes on and tells them, if Abraham was your father, you would do the works of Abraham. And they were not doing the works of Abraham. They were pushing to a point there that they actually wanted to get rid of Jesus. They wanted to do away with, they wanted to kill him. And they finally said, well, God is our Father. And Jesus said, if God was your Father, then you would do the things, you would love me, because I and the Father are one. So if God is your Father, you would do, and you would have the same kind of reactions that God has. You would have those same traits about you. And you would love me because I came from the Father. In John 18:37, Jesus says, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. We have to listen to Jesus as people of truth, as truth seekers, as Jerry would say. So, to be truth seekers, we have to seek after Jesus. And Jesus even tells us there, those of God listen to me. They listen to me. So even today, if we want to be of the truth, then we have to listen to Jesus, don't we? We have to know the truth, because when we know the truth, we've been set free from the bondage of sin that encircled everyone that's without Jesus. And also in that same verse there of 2 John, the verse 1, truth abides in us, and also John says it will be with us forever. The truth that Jesus gives comes to live in you and will be with you forever. Now you can walk away and leave it, but that truth is still the truth, isn't it? Yes, it's still the truth, whether we accept it or not. But it will be with you forever. It's not going to leave. It's not going to change. The truth that Jesus brought is the same truth he brought over 2,000 years ago. It's still the same truth today. It's been taken and dissected many different ways. Today we can look around and see that. But the truth, Jesus' teachings is valid today as they were then. What Jesus said then is just as valid now. And he says there in verse 4 of 2 John, he said he rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth. And remember, he's writing to a church. He should have been able to say all of your children are walking in the truth. Well, what does it mean to walk in truth? What does that mean? What does it mean to walk? Well, walking and abiding is practically the same thing. If you're walking in the truth, you're living in the Word of God. You're letting that Word come in and live in you. You're doing the things that Jesus did. You're doing the things, not just listening to the things, but you're doing the things that is written in this book, written that Jesus has instructed us to do. You're doing those things, and if you do that, you're walking in truth. And John there says, I'm glad to know that some of you folks, I love you because you're walking in the truth. You're living that life. The biggest problem they had then was there was so many Gnostics around, people that said Jesus did not come in the flesh. Jesus, because all flesh is bad. Therefore, Jesus could not be in the flesh. And these people, maybe some of them have been Christians, and they were infiltrating and coming in and bringing this Gnostic teaching. Just like today, sometimes we can have these teachings that come into the church that's not part of Jesus' teachings. And like I said before, if you don't know the difference between a truth and, I'll say, the untruth, you're liable to believe either one. Now, we need to be a people of the truth. I didn't say we need to walk around and open somebody's mouth and cram this Bible in them saying, you're going to hell unless you believe this way. You need to make sure that you're understanding the truth of God also. Yeah. So, Jesus gives us many examples. You know, if we want to judge somebody, he says, if you want to get that speck out of your brother's eye, you'll remove the log from your eye first. So that's why we need to be careful when we start going out and condemning people, and that's never our job. It's not our job to condemn anybody. Is it? No. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We'll leave that to who has that right, and it's not us. And he says there, this is the love if you're walking in the commandments. If you're walking in the commandments in verse 6 there. Walking in his commandments. This is how we show love and how we show we are of the truth. We're staying with the commandments that Jesus gave us. In fact, Jesus said in John 13, 34 and 35, another favorite verse that we talk about many times. He says, the love that I have, the love I give you, if you are my disciples, you will have the same type of love. The love that I have with the Father. I want you to love one another. And he says, if you have that kind of love, then the world will know that you are my disciples. That's how people are going to know that you walk in the truth, by what you do. And shortly thereafter, remember what he did? He got down and washed their feet. Washed the feet, even washed the feet of Judas. He says, now that you've seen me do this, I gave you this as an example. You go and do the same. I don't know that he meant go and wash somebody's feet necessarily, but you go and be that servant. You bring that message of truth and love to a hurting and lost world. That's what's going to make a difference in the world out there. I know of a young lady, and they had a church, I'll just call it that, a church, in a location that was not a very desirable location. In fact, the people that lived next door to them were constantly robbing them. They were taking their tools that they worked with, their air compressors and their power tools and things like that. And this young lady's father said, well, I want to press charges. I want them to go to jail. I want to catch them. I want to the fullest extent of the law, I want them to pay for this. And the daughter said, why don't we cook them something and take them some food? And long story short, by them showing love to those people, they changed. In fact, they became the guardians of their place to make sure nobody bothered their location in their church. But that act of love, by turning the other cheek, not doing what the world would dictate, not doing what, I want my rights. We give up some of those rights when we have a Lord and a Master, don't we? Because if we call him Lord, that means we have to do what he asks us to do, don't we? And that is obey his commandments. Treat others the way that Jesus treated them. So, and in John 15, just thinking about this walking in love and walking in the commandments, Jesus said, I am the vine and you are the branches in John 15. He said, unless you remain in me, you won't be able to do anything. And my Father is the vine dresser. God is the vine dresser. And the branches that are in me, if they are not fruitful branches, what happens to them? They're cut off, thrown into the fire. You would do the same thing with a tree that's unfruitful. You had a fruit tree and it had a branch out there that was doing absolutely nothing but sapping good sap or good nutrients from the tree there. You're not going to keep it if it's not producing anything. Jesus said, if you remain in me, you will be fruitful. That's what we need to do, church. We need to make sure we remain in Jesus. Walk in that love. Walk in his commandments. Hold to Jesus' teachings. That's what we need to be about. And in verse 7 of 2 John, John reminds them there. He says, many deceivers have gone out. And he tells us those deceivers what they say. You can read it there in your Bible, in 2 John, verse 7 there. He says, these are the deceivers are those that say, Jesus Christ did not come in the flesh. John says this is the deceiver. This is the Antichrist, which we also talked about in the first letter of John. And he says in verse 9, to watch out for yourselves. To watch out. He says, watch out so that you don't lose what you have worked for. So when I looked at that the first time, I thought that salvation was a gift. I thought that God did the work. Why would John say, be careful and to not lose what you have worked for? Well, it's of the same type that Paul says to the Philippian church, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. I say you can't work yourself into heaven, but you can sure work yourself out of it. We don't get into heaven by works, but we have to be in that Word of God. We have to be a people of God, students of God, disciples of God, don't we? Mm-hmm. Yeah, by studying and doing what he asks us to do. And it's not easy. You'll never hear me say being a Christian's easy. It's not easy, but it's the best life, because I, like some of you, have sampled the other part, and I know where that leads to. It leads to problems, heartache, and all sorts of things that we don't want to be a part of. Maybe some of us were, but we changed. We had someone that loved and cared about us enough to share the message, the loving message of Jesus Christ. And we saw in that a love that was different than the love that we thought we had in the world. The true love is only found in God. Yeah. That love that you really can't put a distinct equation to. God's love so much supersedes man's love. But he says to watch out. Watch yourselves. So we need to be vigilant people to watch what we're saying and what we're doing and what we're teaching. Be like the person that Jesus, whenever they had showed him the temple and all the great workings of the temple, and Jesus said, all of this is going to be destroyed. And he says, you need to be alert. You need to be ready, because destruction's coming. You need to stay awake, because you don't know. And then he tells the story about the master that goes off and leaves someone in charge of the servants. And they don't know exactly what time the master's coming back, but those servants better be doing what the master wanted them to do until he comes back again, because they don't know what hour he's coming. So he says, be on guard. You stay alert. The same token today. Jesus is coming back one of these days. Yes. He's coming back one of these days. Yes. We don't know the hour and all of that. We don't know. We look at signs. All of us do that. We look at them. I don't know how the world can go on the way it is and God not come back. I've said that. Maybe you have too. With all the things we see around us, all the heartache and all the misery we see around us sometimes, we wonder, is this the time? We know one thing for sure. We are in the last days. We are in the fullness of time. Jesus can come back at any time. Anytime he's ready. In verse 9 it says, if you abide in the teaching, you have the Father and the Son. If you abide in the teachings. Yes. If you do not abide in the teachings, what's the alternative? you do not have God. If you don't have God, you don't have Jesus. So if we don't abide in the teachings, if we don't abide in love, if we don't abide in the truth that Jesus brought, if we don't abide in that and live in that and study that, and it become a way of life for us, that's that walking in love and walking in truth. I don't know exactly everything I'm going to encounter tomorrow, and you don't either. So how are we going to act? What are we going to do? What are we going to say? We're going to depend on what we've learned, what we know as Christians, as God's followers. It doesn't matter who they are, how much money they got, or how much money they don't have. We need to treat everyone the same. And I'm going to tell you, you'll have some undesirables come your way. Did Jesus die for them?
Yes.
Absolutely he did. Just think of the beggars that was encountered around the temple that Jesus encountered. Those the lepers and the people that had all sorts of diseases and things like that. Demon possessed that he encountered. He didn't walk away and run off scared somewhere. He encountered with them. He dealt with them.
Yes.
The devil takes us down. The devil takes people down many dark roads sometimes. And sometimes we get to see those people. And they come our way. We need to deal with it. We need to be ready. We need to abide and to walk in that truth and in that love. And share that message with those around us. I believe the Bible. I believe what Jesus says. I believe Matthew 6:33. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And I think he's going to take care of you.
Yeah.
I believe that. There's nothing more disheartening to me than to have someone in the world that's suffering. Maybe they're in a hospital. Nobody's sitting with them. Or maybe they're destitute and they just lost their job and they've got a wife and children at home and the rent's due. My first thought and my first thing to ask them is, do you have a church family? It's going to make a difference. We're to help one another, aren't we?
Yeah.
And those around us. Remember, who is my neighbor? Jesus was asked that question. We're going to have that encounter around us. The benefits are endless for those that are in the body, those that are in the church. You're going to have that love and respect and help. I know if I needed something, I could call on people. By the way, you guys need to answer that. I've sent out that text too about speaking on February nights. You know who you are. I can choose volunteers, by the way. See that no one leads you astray. It's what Jesus would say. He said that to those around him, his own apostles. Don't let anybody lead you astray. Be on guard. Beware of what you let in. You see, at this time there were lots of house churches. Mm-hmm. And people, there wasn't McDonald's and Denny's and all of that. People traveled and they had a lot of church houses, and there would be different evangelists and preachers that would come their way, and they would invite them in, and that's how it might get started. And John here is saying, be careful when you invite these new teachings into your home. Don't partake of it. 1 Corinthians 15:33, don't be misled. Bad company corrupts good morals. It's not that we don't take in people and listen to people, but don't let something that's foreign to the Bible, that teaching, come in. Don't take part in that. Most of the teachings that have deviated from Jesus' teachings, the ones I have looked at, started out in Christian principles, started out with Jesus' teachings, but they went off and left field somewhere. They did not abide in the truth. Do you want to abide in the truth? Are you abiding in the truth? I want to abide in the truth. There's only one way to do that, and that's abide in Jesus' teachings. Do what he asks us to do.
Yes.
As Bill would say, I'll give you back a few minutes because I took some of your minutes this morning. You stand in need tonight. Prayers of the church. Maybe there's something that you need to share with the church. Whatever it is, come while we get a stand and sing.